Hey everyone, thanks for being here. We're going to talk about this project that was super fun to work on about all the different ways that you can measure the tallest mountain in the world. So it's done by myself and Courtney and also Eduardo Velez, who couldn't be here today, but it was also a much larger team. I want to give a shout out to Megan McCrink, who's another designer on the project, and Brian Kevin, who's a text editor. So one really cool part about this project is it had a print version, which is circling around there, should pass them back, and a digital version. But these two versions looked entirely different, had entirely different use cases, how people were going to be reading them. So I'm going to start off by looking at the print version. So this is what we ended up with, but it was a long process to try to get here. Started off a few years back. I'd been doing a lot of adventure mapping on different expeditions up Everest and K2 and Annapurna, and I really wondered, what is actually the tallest mountain in the world if you sit at the base and look up at it? You know, I know the heights above sea level of all of these different ones, but if we actually try to measure the mountain from the bottom to the top, which one is the tallest in the world? And it turns out the answer was not as simple as I thought it'd be. There was a lot of disagreement, not even among climbers, but also among scientists. So we know where the top of the mountain is, but defining the base of a mountain is something that's really hard. You know, is it the glacier below? Is it sea level? Is it even below sea level? So this is a screenshot of a Reddit thread, one of many of people arguing, oh, it could be this one, no, it could be this one. So we went down a really big rabbit hole and found all these different ways to measure what the tallest mountain in the world is, even some brand new ones. Spoiler alert, they involved way more math than I've ever done in my life. So yeah, that was quite the challenge. But we came up with these 8 contenders that could each be the tallest mountain in the world, depending on how you measure. Some of them are more colloquial claims, like Denali, which is the highest off a flat base, but other ones are more technical, like Chimborazo in Ecuador, which is the furthest from the center of the Earth mathematically. But what we really wanted is for readers to look at these mountains on a level, fair playing field and choose for themselves what they thought the tallest mountain was. So doing that with photos and even a lot of like oblique renders is really hard because perspective gets in the way. You know, the foreground's bigger than the background. So we had to figure out how we were going to do that. There were some graphics out there that would do it, but what we really wanted to do is have something that was not just accurate in terms of height, but also brought kind of the Nat Geo authoritative style to it and have something that could actually show the true shape of the mountain. So accurate, not just height, but also width. So that was kind of a hard thing to do, harder than we thought. We started off with all these triangles here. You know, we wanted height, width, and all these angles of slopes. What we realized is we were going to need a render for each one of these mountains. But the question was, how do we get the perspective out of it? How do we make it that flat, kind of 2D sideways thing? And the answer to that question was looking at it from really far away with a telescope. Had to have a Pirates of the Caribbean reference in here. But once you do that, you know, if you're looking at a mountain from really far away, we started off about 15 miles away from the summit of the mountain. Other mountains are going to get in the way. So this is the raw DEM here. Anyone know which mountain this is? Can anyone guess? Bonus points at the end. It's Annapurna. But so we cut out the DEM to kind of take out the parts that we didn't want to show and get that view of the mountain that we really needed, which was kind of a painstaking process. We had to like manually go in and trace in the valleys to cut out those other parts of the mountain around it. So we ended up with renders that looked like this. This is Denali here, and also Annapurna. But then the next challenge that we had to do is how do we get them scaled and so they can be compared to one another. So we figured out known elevations on the mountain, and an illustrator actually just, you know, used the scale tool and mathed them into where they should be. So figured, you know, here we are. It's good. But wrong. If you can see the issue here, the sub-peak Annapurna Fang should be at about 7,600 meters, but at the angle we're looking at it, it's almost 8,000 meters there. So our perspective was off. So we looked at it from 15 miles away and decided, okay, we got to pull the camera back. So that's what it looks like from 75 miles away. But even that wasn't good enough. And we ended up with a camera that was over 1,000 miles away. But I think it's just really interesting to see how the mountain changes. This is the exact same angle. It's just the camera being further back with, you know, a big lens. just for fun, we figured out that the camera would actually be in the Indian Ocean. Yeah, and the lens that we used is over 10 feet long, so you can picture that. It's even longer than Jack Sparrow, so yeah. So the next step was puzzling all these mountains together, which there was no secret to doing this. It was just a lot of trial and error, and pulled my hair out several times. But we ended up here, and I think the way we could fit them together is taking some of the wider mountains and putting them to the edges so they could fade off, and then trying to follow kind of these natural contour lines, and making sure that the parts we needed to see of each mountain were visible. Like Denali, for example, is the highest off a flat base, so we wanted to make sure that the readers could actually see that flat base that they were measuring off of. So a lot of different things there. We had some supplemental graphics that I won't get into too much, but you can see in the magazine. And then this is what we ended up with. So I should mention that we had an artist, Thomas Müller, to kind of get the sky and unify some of the lightings there. So we took some renders and then painted over them, and especially areas where we didn't have great data, to kind of upsample them. So I think it's really cool to see this like almost fantasy landscape that actually shows a bunch of real things. So hopefully people can look at it and pick which one is their favorite, think which ones they should win. And now Courtney's going to talk some about the interactive version, which was a whole other challenge.
Hello, I'm Courtney, and yeah, so I'm on National Geographic's interactive team, and one of the challenges that we were brought to this project was we came in afterwards. This was approved as an interactive and a print version, but something that they wanted us to think about was how to take a classic National Geographic style map and make it feel modern and something that you could play with on either your phone or on a mobile desktop. So completely different idea or way to use the information. So our challenge, how do you do this specifically? So we knew a few things going into like the process of this, and I'll caveat that I'm not really going to talk about mapping terrain. I'm going to talk about how we like reconceptualize this idea for mobile and desktop in like a totally different way for the interactive process. But we knew that classic National Geographic maps needed to inform the style of the design that we went with. We wanted people to feel like they could pick up the mountains and play with them. We knew that the tone should not be overly like educational and academic. We wanted people to feel like they were having a conversation with somebody about this like really specific in-depth thing. We wanted people to spend time on the idea. And my boss wanted something like this to inform like the modernization of the thing, something that was like really playful and new, but obviously that is not what we ended up with specifically. So we had some questions coming out of that, which was, how do you take an iconic National Geographic map and add a modern flair to it without losing its sense of self? We still wanted you to go through the experience and feel like you were learning something from Nat Geo, not this like miscellaneous thing that was getting added to Nat Geo. We didn't know initially how we were going to do the actual 3D modeling of the mountains. There was consideration of doing it in Blender and then rendering them as videos. We talked about maybe doing them in browser. We ended up doing them in browser. But we had there was a process of deciding how that was actually going to happen. And then how do you dethrone Everest without dethroning Everest? Because it does still win for height above sea level. But we wanted people to question that idea that height above sea level is the only measurement that is important or that matters. And then how do you take mathematical complex theories and make them visual without also, they have to make sense. They have to easily make sense quickly as you're going through them. So it may not surprise you, but we had to do a lot of storyboarding, so much storyboarding. And at every step of the process, we ended up having to continuously pitch this to our editors and have them them also understand the storyboards. So I have presented the storyboard in some fashion about 5 times before we actually got to get into the building part of this. We started this project in January, end of January. It published in September, but we didn't actually get into the building process of it until about May. So the build time was about 8 weeks compared to a lot of ideation time. So just more storyboarding, but getting into how we came up with how we were gonna do the interactive. We tried a bunch of different ideas. We tried a true just explainer, this is the measurement, this is what it works, here you go. We tried a choose your fighter style video game idea that originally you were gonna pick a mountain and it was gonna compare it to another mountain. There was gonna be a lot of huzzah, this one wins. We tried the idea of a mountains dating app, you swipe left or right depending on if you agreed with this. And we tried comparing everything to Everest, but that didn't really seem like in the spirit of the thing. And we tried to think about having each mountain have its own bespoke interaction. And one cool thing is that basically, even though this wasn't like, none of these were kind of the true way we went through with it, all of the ideas brought something special that actually ended up getting in the final product in some way, shape, or form, which was really cool. So we also had some recurring problems we were trying to solve for, which was avoiding information overload. There's a lot to get through. We want you to actually like get to the end of this thing and not bail out. We didn't want it to be so playful that you didn't take it seriously or that it felt like it wasn't like worth learning this new information. We knew we were asking a lot of the user to go through all of this. And we needed to know how much we could realistically build. As Soren mentioned, the team of the people who built it was us two and then a primary engineer. And then we had a design help and a text editor, but that was the whole team. So we were working on kind of a tight amount of time. And then it was just hard. We had a lot of drawing on boards. I didn't know a lot of these words before we went into this project. It was great. So we're going to do a little bit of a high-level overview of how to build a mountain in browser. I'll caveat this by we have a primary engineer. He is the one who did most of the work on that, so if you have highly technical questions, we can forward them to him later. That's not my specific area of expertise. But we have the DEM that loads in browser. This is the DEM. It gets a very beautiful imagery draped over it, and then you end up with something like this. But one thing that we had to really consider going through this is, especially with rendering each mountain in the browser as you go through it, is that the DEM couldn't be super high quality because it would crash. You would open it and nothing would load. So how we ended up working over that is having really, really high quality imagery draped over low quality DEM. And that was because especially like in mobile, you need to get through all of it too. And we were really about like 80% of the people who come to this come from mobile. And so we couldn't neglect them in thinking about how we built this. So that's it, right? You have the mountains in it, we're good to go, we just have to write some text. No, there's like a lot of other things that went into this. The trouble with cross-sections, when we originally built the mountains in browser, you have these kind of side lines that come off of it. And we tried a few ways to solve them. We thought about just leaving it, like, oh, maybe people won't notice. But it did actually introduce some weird problems. And like sometimes there'd be like a lake or something, or like a section of blue that made it look like there was a lake or a waterfall that like didn't exist. And then we also tried cutting off the cross sections and just having them live as these kind of like one-dimensional, two-dimensional pieces. But it felt like it didn't satisfy the need of like having this thing that you could like play with that got plucked out of the earth for you. And so we ended up Soren actually drew all of the cross sections and we had to line them up specifically to each mountain. And this is just an example of something that we had to solve for, is like that didn't always line up perfectly. It looked like there was a lake there, and my boss was like, is this a lake? Can we label it? Why is this here? It was just a mistake. But we ended up, through trial and error and working on them, we got these beautiful little cross sections that actually made it look like you did kind of like pluck it out of the earth. And then I'm going to take just a second to explain kind of like how we decided the visual measurements for some of the mountains. But we thought about this by thinking beyond just scrolling on your phone or desktop, like what's going to actually make you interested in each mountain specifically, customizing the style and animations to further the storytelling, and then having people consider, okay, what happens next? Like the two things I've seen before have been different, so I can't expect the same thing to happen again. And for this example, I'll use Chimborazo as one of our first ones, which is the first mountain that comes up in the experience. We were working off of this graphic, which is a helpful way to understand this measurement, but it's not immediately clear what you're looking at unless you like take the time to read through it. So we knew we kind of wanted Chimborazo and Everest to like sit on the same plane and move somehow. But we tried maybe using a line, maybe using like different ways of how that would move. But this is what we ended up with, which is you have both mountains on the same plane with Chimborazo in front, Everest in the back. And then as you change the baseline to the center of the earth, they actually switch positions. And then we have a line that shows you kind of the difference now that you're looking at in height, which we thought looked really like very beautiful, but also really helped illustrate this difference now. And then the same for Mauna Kea, since the base is technically 70 miles away underwater. We wanted people to feel like they were questioning what the theory of where the base really could be, but still feeling like you were getting pulled and extracted into this idea. So the furthest one is what's actually in the final product. We don't immediately show you the base. We pull you back into it. And every mountain had their own specific thing. They have their own animations, they have their own visual diagrams on them. I won't get into all of them since we're kind of, I think, running from time. But here's a few little fun things. as I mentioned, a lot of the stuff in here was exploration that ended up in the final product. Something that I think is really fun is that all of the gradients throughout in the background of this are actually pulled from the colors of the mountains themselves. And so they like have a thing that is specific to them that we thought was really fun. And this is just a few examples of like what the storyboard looked like in the final product. We did kind of towards the end have a strong vision of what we wanted it to look like. So we have storyboard to the final. We knew there's awards for all of them. They do actually win something, but they're just winning their measurement. There's no head-to-head competition. We have a globe that moves around each mountain that you go to. It like spins around and takes you to the next one, so you get the sense of like traveling the globe throughout, and a strong sense of place. And then we also knew we wanted to be able to show all of them on the same plane at some point. So you have them, they rotate, they animate. It's very beautiful. And then these are just a few of the GIFs that were in there earlier, but this is kind of like the overview vibe of the experience. And then this is the story team. This is all of our picks for the favorite mountain too. And we have a QR code to the interactive. I didn't check if it works, so I hope it does. But that's the interactive.
Probably have time for one question.
How did you pick what angle to look at the mountain from?
For which?
Let's do Denali.
Okay.
Oh, so each angle, I guess, was determined based on like how that mountain specifically won for both the interactive and the print. So if it was getting measured from a certain point, that's where we had to show like generally the larger side of the mountain, because sometimes a mountain can like rise really high on one side but not that high on the others. There's also some technical measurements that like do draw the base at some point, which if you want to like read the whole thing, gets into those. So like making sure that like that actual mathematical base is visible. And then honestly, there were sides of the mountain that just had better high quality data than the other ones. So like we avoided the east face of Everest, for example, just because the imagery was not as good. It's like there's a little bit of like hiding the bad side, sticking the Christmas tree to the right angle. A number of different factors.
Thank you very much.